about the overhaul of the pension system in Ireland and the major, I suppose, time bomb that's ahead of us if we don't do something about it, on encouraging people to take out private pensions in one way, but also they're looking at, I suppose, cutting back on tax relief for pensions for the private sector or for private pensions. Have you a view on maybe an overall strategy for that?
Well, clearly the pension time bomb is a huge issue. Okay, I think the extent of the problem is being exaggerated a little bit at the moment because pension funds have collapsed over the last 18 months. So it's a slightly artificial situation. The international equity cycle will improve over the next 2 or 3 years, so pension values will start to come back. But that doesn't take from the fact that there is a structural problem with future pension coverage. Quite simply, the level of pension coverage in the private sector is too low. Many companies in defined benefit pension schemes cannot fund those pensions. So there is an issue to be addressed. I believe one of the correct approaches is to provide tax incentives for people in the private sector to contribute to their own pension schemes. There is an argument being made out there that we are wasting money on tax relief for pension contributions. I do not buy into that argument. I think I would have argued in the last couple of years that not alone should, everybody that makes a pension contribution gets tax relief at their marginal tax rate. For 41% taxpayers, that's a pretty good incentive. For 20% marginal rate taxpayers, it's not quite as good an incentive. I believe that you should have had 41% tax relief for everybody, regardless of their level of income. That would provide a greater financial incentive to low-income workers to make bigger pension contributions. But the Commission on Taxation is looking into this. There's a lot of pressure to get the 41% down, and my understanding is that the recommendation that the Commission on Taxation will be making when it reports in July is that there should be a single tax write-off of 30%. And on the back of that 30% tax relief, it's going to be an SSIA type pension arrangement. In other words, people are going to be paying into an SSIA type arrangement and they get a 30% tax relief. I would prefer to see a higher rate of tax relief because I think tax relief provides the biggest incentive for pension contribution. So, you could save money in the short term by reducing the relief, but at the end of the day, you are storing up serious problems 20, 30 years down the road, which we will all end up paying for. But I think that's what the Commission is going to be recommending, 30% and an SSIA type scheme rather than the existing ABC type scheme.
There's a new word after appearing there recently, this hyperinflation. Do you think with all the stimulus packages being put into economies that eventually this is going to lead to the so-called hyperinflation?
Yeah, I suppose I kind of addressed that in a sense when I spoke about interest rates there. The bottom line is central bankers are tearing up the rule books at the moment. They're pumping money into economies. It's the sort of helicopter approach, and the Europeans are going to do it shortly. You fly over a country in a helicopter, you dump money out in the hope it'll fall into people's hands and they'll spend it. That's what they're doing. They're printing money. From a central banker's perspective, that is a deeply uncomfortable situation because most central bankers still believe the old Thatcherite notion that inflation is always and everywhere a monetary phenomenon driven by excess money supply. So that's why I say they are extremely uncomfortable, and the moment we start to see any semblance of economic recovery in the Eurozone, the European Central Bank will move to take interest rates up again to prevent inflation from becoming an issue 2 or 3 years down the road. So that's the slightly longer term argument. To think about hyperinflation at the moment is nonsense. The global economy is in serious recession. It is necessary to do whatever is necessary to get the global economy out of that recession. That's what they're doing. But have no doubt about it, as far as I understand it, the moment you start to see the international cycle improving, interest rates will move up again quite quickly to prevent that money supply from feeding into higher inflation. So central bankers will react. The problem, as I said, for Ireland is that the chances are that once the interest rate cycle starts to move up, it would be totally inappropriate for the Irish economy. So I suppose my advice to companies, to individuals, do not borrow aggressively if you could borrow at all in the current environment, but do not borrow aggressively on the basis that these interest rates are permanent. They're not. It's a temporary window. And the second part of that argument is that there is a temporary window going to be provided for individuals and businesses to lock in rates medium to long term.
Jim, first of all, thank you very much for a brilliant presentation.
Blushing, thank you.
Jim, we're digging ourselves into a big hole. You spoke then about the political will to actually get ourselves out of the strong leadership. Now, if that does not come, and there's no sign of it coming yet, what then?
Well, dare I say it, what prompted us back in 1987 to do what we did was an external influence. It was the threat, and the very real threat, of the International Monetary Fund. In the middle of 2006, that was an extremely high probability that the IMF would come in to us out. If we, we politically fail to address the problems, and we continue to see a deterioration in the public finances and in the economy over the next couple of years, we should hope for an external influence. And that external influence would be the German influence through the EU, or the external influence through the International Monetary Fund. So there's a part of me that would actually welcome IMF intervention, because they would come in, they would have no political allegiances, they would have no sentimental attachment to any sector of the economy. They just come in, they slash and burn. And if that is the only way to get the public finances back in order, well, so be it. But I'd hate to test the theory. We have an opportunity to do it ourselves, we should. But if we don't, and it's the political system that will determine whether we do or not, and it's up to you as a business lobby group to ensure that the political system gets this right. But if we don't, the external influence would actually be desirable at the end of the day. But it will be painful. You look at what's happening in Latvia at the moment. Public sector wages are being slashed. But that's what the IMF would do if they came in. And if we don't do it, well, so be it.
Just over here on the right.
Jim, what's your view on NAMA? It's disingenuous to say that the makeup of NAMA would help get us out of this banking crisis. If you buy the assets from the banks at a reduced level, and the argument is that you'll make a profit of these, as some commentators said they did in Sweden, over 15 years, as you recover, you make a good profit for the state. Are you not weakening the banks so much that they require recapitalisation, more recapitalisation? And is it not just robbing Peter to pay Paul? Would it not be better to leave the assets within the banks and let them sort them out themselves?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many different arguments you could make about NAMA. I have to say, I would fundamentally believe that the NAMA type structure is the only one that's going to work. Because at the end of the day, if you leave the bad debts with the banks, it's going to take them so long to sort out those bad debt problems. It's going to take them so long to build up a capital base that would allow them to get back into the business of lending money again, that the economy will be destroyed. Okay, so I think we have to take the loans off the banks to repair bank balance sheets, to get banks back into the business of lending money again. At the end of the day, I'll go back to my final point there, the only way we emerge from this crisis is through quality economic growth, and part of that has to be credit flowing in the economy again. So we have to take them off the banks. It will take 10, 15 years to manage the way through these assets. Okay, they're taking the good and the bad loans, so there will be some quick bang for the buck in terms of the profitable stuff that's been taken off the banks, but the bad stuff, it will take conceivably 10